Hey, Manuel, it's so great to finally get to speak to you. Thank you so much for showing interest in my curiosity, knowing more about you, and getting on the podcast.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I have to say, I quite like the idea of this podcast, and as a listener as well, of just hearing how people in different careers, different industries have become what they are. So I hope today's episode will be interesting as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And to make sure people listening to the podcast get to know who you are, can you just give us a little bit about yourself, on who you are, where you're speaking from, and what is your job, what is your profession today in the moment?
Of course. So I'm Manuel Pais. I'm originally from Lisbon, Portugal, and I've moved around a bit. So I've lived in a few different countries, and now I live in Madrid, in Spain. Happened to end up here for work 10 years ago, and now I have a beautiful family with 3 kids. So I'm probably gonna stick around here for a little while more. And yeah, I'm almost 44 years old, so I've been in the industry of software engineering, let's say, for about 20 years and a little bit more. So I graduated as a computer engineer in 2000, and then throughout my career, I've had a number of different roles, from developer to tester to team lead, until I actually became a consultant around DevOps and continuous delivery. And finally, these days, I'm more known as one of the authors of the book Team Topologies that came out in 2019.
Fantastic. I just really want to share with the audience of this podcast. I absolutely love the book. I think it brings together a lot of prevalent and also interesting ideas around building for flow, making sure you're building teams which are successful, productive. So thank you so much, you and
Thank you.
also Matthew, for inspiring the generations of engineers, engineering leaders, and organizations around the world. I have been also gifting this book a lot of people who have been asking me this question. So I absolutely love the content and the way you presented this. Very concise, to the point, and I think it's like, as I said, it's always accessible, and you can always go back to it. It's not like you read through it and you're done. It's like a reference, so you can always come back to it. And thank you so much for writing it.
No, thank you for your kind words. And that was one of our goals, to write a book that you can go back to and reread some parts to remember, how does this work, or what was this other pattern. And I also want to say that we're obviously standing on the shoulder of giants. There's a lot that we brought into the book, in a way, by combining these different aspects that people know about, but maybe not as a coherent whole around, things like Conway's law, trust boundaries, many different things, cognitive load, many different things, that what we did was really bring them together in a consistent way, to think about teams, to think about how the way we set up teams either enables or slows down the flow in our organizations. But also, just to finalize, fundamentally, for me, what kind of the indirect goal of the book is to make life better for people in those teams, that they feel a more sense of purpose and autonomy, and that they're contributing to the purpose of the, obviously, of the company that they work for, but in a healthy way, right? Not that they're just following orders, or trying to keep up with unreasonable demands, or whatever might be happening. So that's sort of the humanistic view behind the ideas in the book. Is hopefully at the end of the day, it helps make the workplace a little bit better, while at the same time, obviously, has the goal of helping organizations be more fluid, if you like, and understand better what are the actual streams of value, and how do we organize the teams, and we identify gaps in teams perhaps that we need to address.
Back to the basics, to the foundation. Uh, someone really wise and smart told me once that uh, every author or a book that they write is not written at one point of time. It's constantly being written over time, and it suddenly one fine day it emerges in paper. So my assumption is the same, and I really want to go back since the time you obviously joined industry and your early experiences that perhaps led to you writing this book along with Matthew. Take us to that part of your journey, really beginning of your career. As you said, you spent a lot of time working in different setup, different organizations. What was your experience like, and what were some of the things that you observed there that really brought you and made you that you need to really write a book like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in fact, when I look back, if I look backwards from the book as sort of the recent outcome, and then I think about how I got there, it's really like this amazing chain of events and experiences. So that's a good question. I think one of the key things that kind of helped me move forward and sort of contributed to writing the book at the end is curiosity to learn, to not just improve the way that I was working, but actually learn more about other areas around me, and that's, I think, what sort of led me to have sort of a number of different roles in a relatively short period of time, around 10, 15 years. But I when I graduated, first thing you do is become a programmer, developer. Back in 2000, that was basically it. And then I started in a very small kind of company, and then I moved on to other roles around build and release management, because I was interested in kind of the sort of the mechanisms that help us deliver the work that the developers were doing. And then in this kind of role, I had experience both at a kind of a larger company and also a public organization in Belgium. So it's an European agency for air traffic control. So quite big, quite different also from the private industry. And it helped me to see the differences and the similarities between different organizations. One thing that always seemed to me like it was not really helpful, in the sense of many teams were kind of specialized in their own kind of domain, right? And there was often this kind of back and forth in terms of who is responsible for what, especially when problems happened. And it just seemed to me like going through kind of a very I would say process with some blame, where people are trying to shed the blame from themselves, and it always felt like I'm not sure this is really what we should be doing, right? If we want to achieve good results. And then I've again changed. I then moved from Belgium. I did a master's in software engineering because I wanted to kind of refresh what I knew. So that was quite interesting, to take a year off basically to study again. And then that's when I came to Madrid in 2011, working again for a smaller company, where obviously by then I started having even more kind of perspective on the kind of more common problems you see in small organizations where things are a bit more chaotic and there's a very strong drive to deliver what the client wants, because the company has to prove that it has that it has a place and that it's going to survive, versus that very large or public organization I was talking about earlier, where things are very established and sometimes you lack that drive to, okay, let's actually focus on the customers versus what is the work that we need to do because our boss or the boss of our boss tells us that's what we need to do. So looking at those different perspectives, and then I also then became a consultant around 2015, and that again gave me another perspective, especially on the expectations that clients often have from consultants, and sometimes very high expectations in terms of they expect consultants to fix problems that in fact require the organizations to do a lot of thinking or a lot of changing the ways that they are used to work, and so that's not always easy. And all this mix of experiences really led me to, I guess, feel more empathy to other roles, even within our industry, so that I'm not, humans are very strongly attached to one group that they identify with. So I feel like I kind of moved away from not just identifying as a developer or identifying as a tester or identifying as a DevOps person, but actually my experience helped me look at what's good and bad, and what are the problems and challenges that these different roles tend to face, and that gave me a broader perspective, which obviously was important for a sort of a input to the book as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think they really enjoyed, listening to you about the range of experiences that you had in your initial part of your career. I think one is exposed to different varieties of challenges. And I think one of the things which I really connect that to the book is about organizational context, understanding what's happening in an organization and not just looking at, in the industry or the best practices and just applying. A very interesting article, I think it was written some years back, was like people were trying to copy the Apple model of leadership and the way they do product development. And somebody, I think, really commented on that is only this model can work at Apple and Apple scale. And definitely companies who are trying to go in that model will not work. I think I really like the idea about bringing that organizational context in here. But I want to bring back to the point, I think you mentioned something very interesting, is around empathy for different roles. Tell me a little bit about that part itself. Like, how did you express that empathy? How did that form for yourself? What were you seeing on the ground that led you to see and build that empathy for other roles?
I think just experiencing the work itself, the sort of stereotypes that you see in the industry. I think we're moving forward and away from some of these stereotypes, but obviously varies a lot. But as a developer, that people think you don't care about the runtime, that you just do code and then just throw it over the wall to the ops people. And while that might be the case in some situations, but I think in general, it's more, or I've found out that it's likely when that happens is because people were put in a situation that was kind of pushed as the it was almost the incentive or the consequence of the situation they were put in. Because if you set up your team so that some people only code and some people only do operations, then that's what's likely going to end up happening. So there is a part which is, I think the part where this would be kind of part of the, personality of people is not so strong, right? It's really more driven by the structures and the sort of socio-technical system, if you like, that is around them. The way that we set up our teams, the way we set up incentives in organizations and so on. And then I had the same experience then being a tester where, especially in let's say not very agile organizations where we were seen as the people who were blocking the delivery and who were very were too strict or too detail oriented, and the blocking the delivery when internally the team was really focused on we need to ensure the quality for our customers. So this sort of misalignment between what teams internally are trying to achieve, which is, I think, always or almost always, unless you have a very dysfunctional team, but otherwise, almost always the team is trying to do a good thing, is trying to help the organization in the way they think the organization should be helped, right? And that's very much determined by leadership. What is the message that they pass, especially through example, not just what they say, but what they actually do, and how people are, review their performance when that's the case, or how teams are put in place, how they interact with each other or they don't interact. Like when you have teams that only communicate through Jira tickets and things like that, that's obviously going to lead to more and more entrenched silos, right? Where inside the team, they're trying to do their best, but they don't have enough awareness of what other teams are doing. And so for me personally, I saw this happening in organizations, but as I changed roles and I changed organizations, I could see the patterns repeat, and I could see how from the other team's point of view, there was a lack of empathy that was coming from lack of knowledge, really, lack of awareness of what other teams are doing, what kind of challenges are they facing. Because when we limit the communication too much and we're trying to manage by process, then that's what tends to happen, right? People don't really communicate enough. They're just trying to follow a process that someone defined and is supposed to be the right way to do things.
Right. I think this is a very interesting way to put it. I think it's just about, like what you said, is building empathies. I think one of the things that really goes well for you that you had experiences across different sort of roles. So tester working in the operations team and also different scale of organizations. I'm quite interested to also go a little bit more around your experience. As you said, you went for your master's, and a curious thing which I want to discuss with you and see what you have to think about it is, like, the Agile Manifesto came in 2001, right? So it's a really long back. It's almost the same time that you joined the industry, and often I run into people who say that, okay, this is 2021. By this time, I would say, working in cross-functional small teams and focused on small chunks and increments of software should be common knowledge, like knowing how we collaborate with testers, testing as a function, or collaborating with individuals focused on operations, working with design. And I think that was a very interesting observation, because people feel that while this whole manifesto came in 2001, and I think there's this DevOps movement in early 2000 and late 2000s where it kind of became quite prominent, it somehow feels that we did not learn, because we still see pockets of implementation and also large organizations having to go through the same process of learning through pain, through doing the wrong thing, for applying the same bad practices. So how do you see from your vantage point, especially also that you have spent some time in academia, like doing your master's, do you see that there is essentially an education problem whether people coming from universities or people who are doing it like self-learning? Like, is it a bootstrapping problem? Like they don't have access to good resources and mentors who can really give them the direction as they begin their career? Because it seems like it's a hell long time where this should have been common knowledge within the industry.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't have a specific answer, but I think, or I should say, in my experience, I find that what you learn when you're studying is really the basis. So it's quite important to give you, a reference, but it doesn't give you the insights on how organizations actually work, and that's really hard. I guess we could have university and courses that would be more kind of focusing on examples and doing more kind of case study based teaching. That's something that could be improved, but really you don't get to see the dynamics inside organizations until you actually work there. And because we're still relatively young industry, right? There is a lot of legacy in the way of thinking and managing, not by anyone's kind of fault or bad intention, but it's just the way people are used to think about organizations, and the whole software factory idea, to my mind, has been very prejudicial in terms of management thinking that, well, we just need to get this factory working properly, and then software will come out like magic at the end and everyone will be happy, which I think everyone understands it's not really how it works. So that has been, I think, prejudicial. And also you mentioned this idea of best practices. It actually took me some time. I used to be quite keen on processes and things like the CMMI maturity framework and others, because for me, I guess as a younger engineer, that gave me a framework to think about, and that gave me some certainty in the sense of, yes, if we just do this right, we'll get to a much better state. And so it took me a while to actually understand that's not going to happen. That's not how things happen. Yes, you need to continuously improve, but it's not like there isn't a set of best practices that you say, we just do this or we follow these processes and we'll be fine, because there's so much variation in organizations, in size and purpose and leadership, and that's not realistic. And so I think many organizations, and as a consultant, I still hear that quite often. No, we need to learn the best practices, as if that's something absolute across the industry, and I don't think it is. Yes, we need to be aware of good practices and good approaches, but we always need to do the thinking around how does this apply in our organization, or how are we going to experiment and see and understand if this works or this doesn't. So there's a lot of rush, if you like, in organizations to expecting to do a one-step change, right? So if we adopt this, even with team topologies, organizations, I think we just adopt team topologies, we reorganize, redefine the teams, and we'll be done. When it's really a lot more about the learning and how do you actually have this learning cycles where let's experiment, let's try this and see what happens and see if that improves or not. And so I think those are the reasons. Agile, for example, I think it's not by chance that it's about principles and the manifesto. It's not Agile Manifesto wasn't telling you to do Scrum or to do this sort of meetings. It was much more loosely defined because it was about the principles, so that then the organizations can see, okay, if we value more delivering working software, if we value more collaboration, then how do we need to change compared to where we are now? And so that question cannot be answered in the same way for all organizations, right? It depends on the context. And with DevOps, even was even looser than that, where people who started sort of the movement, like Patrick Debois or Gareth Rushgrove and so on, they wanted a space to talk about the challenges around development and operations at the time. That's why there wasn't a definition, or there wasn't a very concrete focus. Was just, okay, DevOps is about the kind of challenges we see in the relationship between teams, in the way we deliver software. So it was both technical and cultural. It just depends what challenges you have, and it was a way to start conversation around that. Obviously, it has sort of been adopted by mainstream, and a lot of the vendors were trying to make it look as a sort of product and tooling thing, and that's just only one aspect. So I think those movements were purposely very loosely defined, if you like. Was not about specific best practices, because that doesn't really work well.
Right. I really liked, I think I picked up a lot of interesting points. I think especially the part around best practices not being absolute. I absolutely agree. And I think, knowing how to apply it and experiment it and see if things are working, it's fascinating. And I think very important point that you mentioned.
I like to talk about good practices. I prefer to call them, look, these are some good practices. These work well for many organizations, so that's why we know they're good, but they're not universally good, right? Or universally best, or necessarily to your organization.
Absolutely. And I think it also rallies to the point that you talk about with Matthew in the book about, organizational experiments, designing teams are more intentional and being deliberate instead of just letting things take their own course. I kind of connect the dots to there. I also kind of feel that the old school factory model, when they saw Agile Manifesto, I think processes and rituals really came like, okay, let's take this and turn this into a factory. I think that's like, the old meets the new, but they try to somehow retrofit the mindset and the manifesto principles into something that can be turned into a factory model. So I think that's where the conflict is, and I would love to obviously spend a lot of time with you on that, given an opportunity. But I know we are on a restricted time today, and I really wanted to get to know more about you. So for me, I think it'll be very interesting to see, like, what was the time with you and Matthew when you were working, essentially, like, when does this idea of the book emerged in your minds? Like, okay, this has to be a book, and this is the form of book that we will write and create for the world.
Yeah, that was an evolution, really. So I started working with Matthew in 2015 as consultant, and he had published, I think the year before or a year and a half, a blog post about what he called DevOps Topologies. So that's how I actually met him. I was at the conference in London, QCon London, back in 2015, and I used to be, well, I'm still editor for the InfoQ website. I'm not active anymore, but at the time I was doing a lot of writing around DevOps. And Matthew gave a presentation, which was, most of it was about teams, and he was talking about different ways to set up teams for DevOps, right? And so as we started working together in consulting for roughly, between 2015 and when the book came out, we had multiple conversations about what we were seeing that was working at the clients or not. We tried things like this idea of the stream-aligned teams, decoupling this large monoliths. How can we kind of find the fracture planes that we talk about in the book? And then the patterns like, well, we actually need an enabling team, or we need a sort of platform team. All those things were taking shape, actually working with clients. And then also big influence was the DevOps Enterprise Summit that started, I think, around, if I'm not mistaken, 2016 or 2017, where we were hearing these stories from fairly large organizations. That's why it's, as the DevOps Enterprise Summit focused on enterprises. And some of those stories were matching our experience as well in terms of patterns, like, yes, the other organizations have tried this platform pattern with focus on self-service, focus on APIs and not blocking the product teams. So basically, we're getting also this confirmation sort of from the external world to us that some of these patterns were also being applied at the same time in other organizations successfully. And we had many conversations, and at some point we said, okay, we really need to write this book. And we were fortunate that IT Revolution, who is the publisher that also organizes the DevOps Enterprise Summit, that they were interested in publishing the book, and that gave it even. We started with a first draft that was probably very academic sounding in the way it was written, and so the editors at IT Revolution did a great job to kind of guide us into, look, this needs to be more of a story, if you like, or it needs to be more of an experience for the reader to kind of build up the ideas, and so it has to change, and that really helped make the book much better than what we had initially. So now when I'm asked by people who are thinking to write a book, I always tell them, yes, you need to have your ideas, your experience you want to share, but that's probably the smallest step. The hard thing is then to actually get that into written form, that it's also very readable and easy to grasp.
Absolutely. What was the things that you enjoyed while writing the book, and things which you felt that, oh boy, writing book is hard? So what was those experiences like?
I quite enjoyed so the book has multiple case studies, so that was really, really great to talk to some of these people, to hear what they have been doing, and then how that fits into with the book, right? Because obviously before the book was published, no one was adopting team topologies, as it didn't exist, but some of the patterns and some of the goals that we have in the book were common to some organizations that we talked with. So that was quite interesting, and even things that came up sort of unexpectedly, or that we hadn't planned. Like we talk about the company called OutSystems, which is actually a sort of unicorn, right? Which started in Portugal, in my hometown, and so I know some of the people who work there. We've been organizing a DevOps Lisbon meetup together as well, and so just from conversations I was having with them was like, okay, this was actually super interesting to include in the book, about splitting teams into smaller teams with more autonomy, with more purpose. So those were very enjoyable. The difficult part of writing the book is obviously deadlines. So first of all, the book publishing industry is very waterfall-like. Obviously there are some good reasons, and in terms of how the actual printing process goes, and how you need to get the paper to print the books, right? And recently, actually, there's been some crisis with lack of paper for different reasons, and obviously the pandemic made it worse. But anyway, it's sort of a waterfallish process to publish a book. And so basically, if you miss a deadline, your book might be delayed by at least 1 year. So you probably don't, we didn't want that to happen. And so it was a challenge, but it also helped us, basically forced us to carve out time from consulting and other things to, okay, we need to do this now. We can't just be postponing. And that ended up being helpful to have this strong deadlines from the publisher, because otherwise we probably would still be trying to write the book at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this picks up my interest now that you talk about deadlines. Like, is there anything that you feel that you wanted in that book, in this book, Team Topologies, that you perhaps could not add it because of deadlines?
A little bit, yes. Not just deadlines, but also we had a limitation on how long the book should be. And again, going back to how much paper and how many copies of the book can be printed. Anyway, a lot of stuff we learned that I had no idea before. But basically, there's one thing in general. We don't have many regrets as the book gets more popular, more people read it, we get more feedback, and I think there may be a couple of things which maybe we'll be able to address in possibly a second edition in a few years. One thing is we initially wanted to write at least a larger section around sort of the boundaries between team topologies and other domains, right? Because again, like I was saying earlier, we don't see team topology as something that you pick up and suddenly your organization is in a much better state than it was a month ago, right? It provides guidance and useful patterns to get started, but you need good engineering practices as well. You need to have been paying attention to agile, DevOps, and SRE perhaps, if that's a concern in your organization as well. So I think team topologies works quite well combined with other approaches like those, or even wordly mapping for strategy, domain-driven design. And one of the really cool things since the book came out is that we see people who are not book authors but are practitioners, well respected, and who are picking up and combining these ideas, right? Team topologies with wordly mapping, for example. People like Susan Kaiser have done really amazing work around that. Or we see now the rise of the idea of data mesh, which is sort of also partially based on the ideas from team topologies. And other people like Nick Tune and Eduardo da Silva. And that's really, really awesome. And I think that's super valuable for organizations to look at what have other people done in terms of combining these different ideas. Not just, it's not just team topologies by itself that's going to solve all your problems. You need to understand which problems it's going to solve. Obviously, almost every organization, every organization has teams, and almost every organization probably will benefit from looking at the ideas and see, could this help us? Should we have maybe more explicit interaction modes between teams, or should we have a platform that is more treated as a product versus shared services, etc. But I think the combination of different domains is really the most powerful thing.
Fantastic. I think we are coming to the last stretch of our conversation today. And just to be very honest, Manuel, if you had time, we could have gone into each of these areas in detail, but I appreciate, the time that you gave me anyway. So super thank you to that. As we're concluding our conversation today, I think there are two things that obviously for me, it'll be great to hear you on that. One is around, this is something I've spoken to also people who have written other books, especially about leaving legacy, right? So to some, the book is already a form of legacy, and to perhaps the others, book is a process to get to creating a legacy, like the desired end state that you would like to see, where you felt uh, you know the whole effort that you put in to meet the deadlines and do all the drill to get the book was justified. So for me, it will be great to hear from you. What do you see as not just the legacy of the book, but I think also for you as a practitioner, as a consultant, as a evangelist, and a community builder, to see, to leave, and what would that be?
Well, let me say that for me, the book is more a starting point for this new journey. So I kind of see it as already a legacy. Even, between me and Matthew, our thinking on some of the aspects we talk about in the book has evolved as we've seen more organizations, and we've helped different organizations, and we have even more insights, right? So we actually have now an online academy with video training, where one of the goals of that academy is to be able to kind of bring this new knowledge, make it available even without having to wait for a new book or a new edition of the book, right? So we do look at it as evolving. We also have on our website on teamtopologies.com, we have industry examples that came out after the book was published of how different organizations adopted some of the ideas in the book, what happened, what were they trying to do. And that we are continuing to evolve and publish more examples as we go, because, like I was saying earlier, Team Topologies is a starting point, and we learn from organizations that try to adopt the ideas. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of success stories, but not everything will necessarily work in the way that we expected as authors, or that the organizations were expecting would happen when they adopted. And so for the wider community, I think the benefit is to see how this evolves. Start with the book, but then you get new insights from the examples, from now with the academy videos as well. But I think everyone should see it as a sort of field, if you like, that is evolving, of organization design, organization dynamics. And we expect to possibly publish a new book in a few years. I think another area that we start to see interest is applying these ideas, not just within the software part of the organization, but actually much broader. There are already some examples where some companies try to adopt the same team patterns to the whole organization, including finance and marketing and leadership. So that's quite interesting. Possibly, I think, is an area where we might end up doing some more kind of in-depth work, whether that's a book or something else, so that people can see that some of the patterns, even though they are sort of originated in the engineering space, can actually be applied to other areas of the organization.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward for reading that, and I totally see this actually being applied everywhere, and not just restricted to the technology and software industry. So I'm super excited with what you both are doing, and I really appreciate all the insights that you have brought in. My last question to you, Manuel, as we end this, and I ask this question to everyone, is for someone like if you just go back in 2000 and starting your career, graduating from university and coming into the industry, if someone listening to this podcast is in the same boat, like really joining this industry, maybe they are graduating from university or going into the formal profession world through self-learning, what would you think you would like to recommend them to like experiences you would like them to have, things that they should think about and learn in 2021, so that they can take advantage of the things that you and Matthew have developed, apart from reading the book itself? But would you see, what would be the experiences and ideas that you feel people listening to this podcast who are in beginning their careers should have?
If I may, I would give a more kind of broad answer that is not kind of software engineering specific. I think people who are starting in the professional world should, a couple of things. One is find out what makes you tick, right? For me, it was the curiosity of learning and learning more about my profession, learning more about other roles within my profession, other things that I could try, and that's sort of kept me moving. For other people, it might be that they want to become really the experts in some specific domain of their work, which is also fine. So find out what sort of makes you tick, right? Whether it's learning, it's becoming an expert, maybe it's the actual collaboration with other teams and interactions with other people. So maybe there are roles where you'll probably be more likely to have more of that sort of work, because that's gonna obviously help motivate you as an individual, but that will also show to the others, and the others will benefit from your drive as well. So basically, don't think that you must stick to doing one thing, or that you need to follow this path. And it can take some time to find out what really motivates you, because, like I said, you won't know how work in an organization feels like until you start it. And the other thing, I feel it's important to say that we're starting to have more and more awareness of mental health, more awareness of psychological safety is very important for people to feel good about their work and to feel like they can contribute effectively. And so don't let other people tell you that the only way to succeed is to whatever work 20 hours a day or 16 hours a day. That has been, for some time, it was sort of common to get this idea that unless you work really hard and you work a lot of hours and you have hobbies around your work, if you're a programmer, that you need to do your own projects on GitHub and besides your work. I think you need to find what makes your life pleasant and balanced, and it's not always that easy, but listen to signals as well of things that you might think, well, this doesn't feel right in the organization. Maybe you feel like you don't have psychological safety, or that you're not working the right things. Whatever it is, that you should follow your intuition as well, because at the end of the day, you have to find out what makes you feel like you're having a good contribution and feel motivated.
Very well said. So follow your intuition and figure out what makes you tick. I leave it at that. Yes. Thank you so much, Manuel. I know it's too late in the evening, and you have been an amazing guest. I really appreciate the time that you choose to invest in this conversation, and I hope we get together sometime later to get deeper into topics as well.
I hope so. It was fun, and I hope people enjoyed the podcast.